Hey, it's Richard with Matthews Wealth Management, end of the year, talking about Federal Reserve balance sheet and M2 money supply. So, doing the same video screen presentation. This looks familiar, but there's a change right there at the end. Whatever, I'll zoom in. But yeah, we got a new month here, right, to go over. As far as you can see the dip, right? That's actually pretty cool. That's a dip that needs to catch all the way up to pre-lockdowns, right? When we decided that economies are unnecessary, there's plenty of money we can eat. This was what we did, was printed money for consumption, anyway, at the expense of capital. And all of this needs to kind of disappear if we care about our prices ever getting back to normal. Surprise, it's the new normal, right? This is kind of baked in. However, to slow inflation, I do believe that M2 is the biggest focus that the Fed should be having. And again, back-to-back months, they've done a good job with this. So is Congress. So strange to say this. 2 months in a row of pro-Congress and pro-Fed on what they're doing. But this is a big piece of inflation. In fact, if you care about what is inflation, this is it, period. There's no more debate. There's no more other piece of the pie. What y'all are talking about is prices. Why are prices going up faster? Okay, prices are reacting to this. This is the definition of inflation. Broken record, I know. Welcome to another month of this. But let's jump into seeing these actual numbers. Blah, 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 right? So all that matters is do percents. This is why you should think in percents instead of dollars, because this is ridiculous. In the last month, they have destroyed almost 0.5% of all of the dollars in circulation. That's good. That is very, very good, because all of this 21.5 trillion is too much. We just don't need that many dollars to be able to figure out how much a loaf of bread should cost versus a Ferrari or a yacht, right? Like, there's only so much production, only so much GDP, and when you start messing with this, all of the other ratios go out the door, and you start trying to figure out, well, what does it all mean? And you have no idea, and that's why the Fed chases their tail. However, if we can destroy and get back to, what's a good M2 number? That's a good question, actually. I think it should be based on population growth. It should also be based on productivity and what the economy is able to produce. And so if you know how many people are there, and you know how much stuff there is to consume, it's much easier to measure with something that's relative to those, instead of something that's up to a bunch of politicians and what they feel it can buy votes or make people feel safer. But anyway, whatever. Year to date, we're down 1%. So we've actually shrunk. If you want to look at inflation, we've had, technically, if Joe Biden wanted to learn econ, he could say that inflation has shrunk by over 1% this year. That is true. Now, the prices have not gone down in relation to this, but it's coming. And that's kind of where everybody is fearful for 2023 is deflation. Oh my gosh, deflation can destroy the world. Very strongly disagree with that. Find me, talk to me on a phone, comment section, whatever. I'll tell you why I think that. But yeah, year to date, we're down. In the last year, which goes to November, and I'm tracking this on end of November, end of the year, whatever. But back to last November, that's a big shift, right? That's a 2.2% swing going into a negative versus a positive. So what in the world did we do last November and December? Weird, huh? Yeah, there's a lot of expenses going on there, but we're starting to destroy it. Still 39% increase before we shut down the economy. So if you want to look at prices and what is a true amount to expect prices to go up, I think that's safe. I actually think a lot of different areas in the BLS and how they calculate CPI and PCE have already crossed this. And also the fact that we're looking year over year in our inflation numbers, when we look at CPI, it should start dropping, guys. Now what the Fed takes out of that is a very different story, but I think we've realized a lot of what the final price increases will be. The biggest issue is how are those price increases going to affect production of things and our supply chain? Because if we have a shortage of supply, which we should have learned during the toilet paper experience, prices go up and people freak out. People get laid off or their wages don't go up to offset it, and people just get more poor, right, relative to what it costs to have a standard of living. So this is one piece of the inflation picture. The other piece is the production side of it, which looks to be falling off, which will keep the inflation rates higher. So blah, blah, blah. Does anybody care? All right, so let's get into the balance sheet, right? Because that's the other piece of how all this inflation was created in the first place. This is the history of the Fed balance sheet as far as they'll show you. And you go all the way back under $1 trillion. We had the, too big to fail after the no house left behind. And this was unfathomable, and we had to bail these out so that the system could reset and we wouldn't lose everything. But the system never got better. It just needed more and more and more. We actually tried some QT in 2018, as you can see, and then we needed a good, actually there's a bailout in here also, FYI. Bailout right before COVID hit. That was just perfect timing. They got their money before they got their big money. But yeah, we've never really been serious about addressing the fact that the Fed is sitting on government debt. They're just monetizing debt at this point. So if the government wants money, they'll just print it for them at the expense of inflation. And everybody wondered, well, where's this inflation been? Well, where's this inflation? It's the same inflation. It's the whole thing. It's all of this that's coming from Treasury, right? My God. Anyway, so let's zoom in, because what changed was right there. That's actually a bigger slope. I like that. So again, this is what we care about, is we want this to start tapering down. This is what quantitative tightening means. This is quantitative easing and then tightening. And if you really want to I'm going to get this on video because I haven't said it yet publicly, but the thing that's confusing is that first thing that the Fed did after 2000 and actually 2001, lowered rates, right? Then we did quantitative easing. Okay, that made sense. It's just making credit easier for people. It's easier to borrow money for whatever you feel like, whether it's useful or not. Just borrow money and do something with it. So lower rates, quantitative easing, meaning just print money. Wouldn't it make sense to do quantitative tightening and then raise rates? But they didn't. Before they did this, they started raising rates. And so once they start to do this, they're not getting a dollar for dollar of their debt. I mean, it's just bizarre. Has anybody even thought of that? Super, super simple. I haven't read a single article talking about it, but it's just, I don't know, it's common sense if you think about it. Let's dive into the numbers on what all this means. Lots of zeros. But in the last month, they've sold 0.5%. That's pretty cool. I'm glad to see that. They said they would aim for 0.5%. They've kind of done that 2 months in a row, like right at it. Year to date, they've destroyed or sold off 2% of their debt, right? They bought bonds, but they've been selling off 2% of what they started with. Okay, now there's a question here because the Fed and the government, for that matter, don't have to follow GAAP accounting principles, which is kind of a misnomer. It's the same thing, it's redundant. But shouldn't we all have to mark to market now, right? That was part of what we did after 2008, except these guys don't, right? Like, so what are these bonds actually worth? Once you've raised interest rates to 4.5%, well, they're not worth 8.5 trillion anymore. So that's the problem of why we should have done QT before raising rates, but who cares? Because it's a crisis. We can't think in a crisis. We have to react and panic and hope for the best, pray to the gods that we worship on the Federal Reserve. Oh God. This is cool too. This is, if you recall on the other one, M2, we were plus, right? A positive on the 1 year as far as M2 money creation. However, they've net sold, so you have to give Fed some credit here. Where would the gap come from? Congress spending. So, and again, I said there's something positive to say about Congress. I'll get to that. But since January, we're up 105% of all of the debt that the Fed had accumulated on its balance sheet from the housing crisis, because too big to fail. Maybe part of capitalism is letting people fail. Maybe that's the part that's missing, is that we privatize the gains and we socialize the losses. Seems wrong to me, but whatever. So how does this all work out? The balance sheet from the Fed, they cut 42 $0.2 billion off of their balance sheet, which is a good start. That's that 0.5%. M2 dropped by $88.3 billion. Wow, there's extra savings, and that goes to Congress. They get the credit there. So last month it was 52. Where did I write all that? 72. Yeah, 72 billion is what was done there, as opposed to 46. So that's 2 months in a row of Congress not spending more. That is good for inflation. In fact, what causes all inflation when we looked at that M2 money supply was the fact that there's not surplus revenue coming in from taxes, from corporate taxes and personal income and FICA and all the Social Security they steal from us. But since there's not that, they have to just issue debt. Well, that is the inflation, right? So if you really want to blame anybody for inflation, yes, the Fed is a big part of it, because the Fed is kind of the enabler here to allow the politicians, who are pretty much anti-economists at this point, to just spend, right? And that spending comes from somewhere. It comes from you tomorrow, and the costs of everything that you buy and that you live on. So your standard of living lowers when you're getting your student debt paid off, because there's no such thing as a free lunch. Like, that's TENSTOPL. That is the acronym of econ, that there's always trade-offs. And if you can't identify the trade-off, you don't know what you're doing. Ask people what the trade-off is before you accept something as being too good to be true, because it always is, man. So, all right. Good job, Congress. Good job, Fed. Keep it up. Maybe speed it up a little bit, and we'll start to see the CPI drop. Now, what does the Fed do with interest rates in response to that? That'll be interesting. I think that they should freeze. I mean, this is penalizing, right? Already, we're trying to crush demand, but I don't think demand is that elastic when you're at the bottom of it. I don't think that people can really stop buying toilet paper. I think that people are struggling to get by in the middle class, what's left of it, and people on the lower end of the spectrum are going to need more subsidies, which creates what? Inflation. So we'll see what they do. But yep, that's the end of the year and tracking the Fed on this video series here. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you got any feedback, any questions or whatever, drop them in the comments section. Reach out to us. We're here to help. See you next year.